Thanks for joining us today for an overview of the Recycling Reform Act. The law signed by the governor this past May is over 70 pages long and has 29 sections. We are here today to go through some of what is in the law, where we are on program implementation, and take your questions. The presentation portion will be recorded, but the question and answer portion will not be. Before we start today, quick introductions about the presentation panel. Kara Stewart and Dan Weston are the co-leads for Ecology Solid Waste Management Program for the Recycling Reform Act. Kara is also part of our Recycling Market Development Center, and Dan is our statewide recycling lead. So here's our plan for today's presentation, is to offer a brief background on extended producer responsibility and residential recycling in Washington. Then Dan and Kara will focus on the Recycling Reform Act in 5 subsections with 2 opportunities to stop and ask for questions. We want to make sure and get through the entire presentation, so we'll take short Q&A breaks and stick around at the end to go over the questions that we didn't get to. We expect the presentation portion to take about 40 minutes. The remainder of our time will focus on questions. We're looking forward to sharing what we are doing and what we anticipate this will look like and hearing your questions. Please put your questions in the chat, and we'll set aside time until 11 to hear from folks and about their questions and comments. We'll do our best to answer the questions. There will likely going to be questions we will need to put on hold and answer at a later time. We will be developing some frequently asked questions and responses that will be posted to Ecology's website. Today's discussion will help with that effort. With that, I will hand it over to Kara.
Thanks, Maya. Okay, thanks, Maya. Before we dig into the Recycling Reform Act, we wanted to do 2 quick level setting slides. First up, let's define EPR, which stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. EPR is a policy that requires companies that make and sell something to take responsibility for that item through the entire life cycle of their product, meaning mostly end-of-life management. Washington already has EPR laws that require producers to establish programs to recover and recycle electronics, mercury lights, paint, medicine, batteries, and solar panels. 7 states in the US have EPR laws for packaging and paper products, including Washington. Today, we'll focus on the Recycling Reform Act, but I wanted to quickly note there are other packaging policies that range from bag bans to restrictions on toxics. And we'd like to do just a quick review of recycling in Washington state today. Over 80% of households in Washington have the option of a recycling bin at their curb. We have 11 counties where residents only have drop-off options and there's no curbside recycling bin. There's an estimated 500,000 households without curbside recycling, which can result in recyclables going into the garbage. A recent estimate reported a residential recovery rate for the state of 40% for packaging. The map of Washington shows the regional recovery rate for residential packaging that ranges from 12 to 59%. And the chart on the right shows the most recent estimates of recovery by packaging material type. These challenges result in over 700,000 tons of recyclable packaging materials going to the landfill. One policy approach that can improve our system is extended producer responsibility. So let's talk about EPR. Washington's Recycling Reform Act establishes an extended producer responsibility program for residential packaging and paper products. You can find the law in the Chapter 70A 208 of the Revised Code of Washington. Most of our slides today will include that link with the reference to the sections of the law for the slide content at the bottom. So now let's look at what's in the Recycling Reform Act and what we'll be covering in today's presentation. Okay, here's the table of contents for the 29 sections of the Recycling Reform Act. What we will cover today will focus on an overview of the requirements on specific entities that have obligations under the law. Those sections of the law are highlighted in this table. We'll mostly be referencing content from sections 020 through 080. As you can see from this list, there's more in this law than we'll cover today. There's a lot of detail in the law about the Producer Responsibility Organization, or PRO, and their obligations. As we don't yet have a registered PRO, we're not able to provide details or answer specific PRO questions. We expect to offer more webinars next year after the Pro registers with Ecology in March of 2026. So if you want to register for any future webinars, join our Recycling Reform Act email list. We'll drop a link to that in the registration in the chat, and we'll share it with you in a later slide. Please sign up. Here's another way just to look at the Recycling Reform Act in one slide. This slide focuses on due dates and responsibilities that are identified in the law for 4 of those obligated entities, what's required and when it's due. These due dates and responsibilities will be repeated in the coming slides as we focus on each of these groups. So you don't need to scribble these down. You can also find a summary of all these due dates on the Ecology Recycling Reform Act website.
So before we go into detail on responsibilities and timeline, let's look at what the Recycling Reform Act covers. The law includes definitions in Section 020 that are critical to understand as they establish who and what is covered. These definitions include covered entities, covered materials, and covered services. Covered entities include single and multifamily residences, as well as public place receptacles managed by a government entity. The law does not apply to commercial businesses. Covered materials are packaging and paper products, which are each further defined in the law. And covered services include a variety of activities surrounding the management of covered materials for purposes of waste reduction, refill, reuse, recycling, composting, or disposal of contamination or residuals. There are also a number of exempt materials. Shown here are the exempt packaging types. These are shorthand descriptions of the materials, and I won't read them all. The definition section of the law includes more detailed descriptions of each category. For example, the exemption for infant formula includes the full definition from the U.S. Code as defined in the U.S. Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And then here's the list of exempted paper products. In addition to the listed exemptions in Section 020, the law includes a petition process for producers to request exclusion of their products packaging from the Recycling Reform Act requirements. That process is described in Section 260. And if you're not sure whether a certain product is a covered material, please reach out to us and we'll provide our current interpretation.
Okay, let's move from definitions to who's required to do what. The Recycling Reform Act requires something from just about everybody. This graphic on this slide is on our Reform Act website, Recycling Reform Act website, with an interactive feature. As you can scroll over each icon, a drop-down box will pop open to show you the entity's responsibilities. We'll go into more detail on each of these main entities during the remainder of the presentation, who they are, what they have to do, and when they have to do it. Let's start with a focus on Ecology's responsibilities. We are responsible for the administration, oversight, and enforcement of the Recycling Reform Act. First off, we have online resources available that should help provide insights into the Recycling Reform Act. We'll drop those links into the chat for our website, our email inbox, and our email list. If you do only one thing today, please sign up for our email list. We'll be using that list to share updates about the Recycling Reform Act, including future webinars, opportunities for public input on studies or reports, information about the pro or service providers, and advisory council meetings. This webinar recording will be posted in about 2 or 3 weeks for later viewing, excluding the Q&A sections, and Dan will touch on the advisory council status in just a bit. On the right side of this slide lists the work on Ecology's plate for the first year during startup. Work is just kicking off for several required studies and contracted activities. We're working on the online service provider registration portal. We'll roll out rulemaking in 2026 and register the pro next March. One of our priorities today, I'm going to say it many times, is to get people registered for future emails from Ecology about Recycling Reform Act activities. The QR code on the left will get you to our email registration site. The URL that ends in 366 is for the Recycling Reform Act. If you don't have any success, send us an email, give us a call, we'll get you registered. Also, we have an Ecology website that provides an overview of the law, the advisory council, links to resources, and more. The QR code on the right will get you to our Ecology Recycling Reform Act website. You can find the link to the email registration and our contact info on that site. We want to be sure folks are kept in the loop on what's happening, so we're going to keep dropping links in the chat. Here are the Ecology duties and deadlines from the law. Our responsibilities in 2026 and 2027 are in the table on the left. All of these efforts will involve consultation and collaboration with interested parties, as well as the PRO and the Advisory Council. Over the next 16 months, we have 8 deadlines. In January, We must establish the advisory council, register service providers, start rulemaking, and submit the first recycling refund study to the legislature. Recycling refund refers to a deposit return system or bottle bill. Dan will provide the advisory council and service provider updates in later slides, and we'll be announcing our rulemaking work in early 2026. The recycling refund study will be available for review sometime in October. Again, sign up for the email list. You'll hear about those opportunities. Later in 2026, we'll publish the statewide list for recyclables and the preliminary needs assessments. The first preliminary needs assessment. Both of those efforts will include asks from Ecology for input and feedback as the list and assessment are drafted and completed. Those dates haven't yet been scheduled. In 2027, we'll publish the second recycling refund study focused on community input and the full needs assessment. Again, we'll be asking for input and feedback, but that timing hasn't been set. What's not shown on this slide are the PRO and producer due dates where Ecology receives information, conducts oversight, facilitates the advisory council, or collaborates on other program details. But on the right are the Ecology due dates in the law that could occur after 2028. So we have a lot to do. Before we wrap up the Ecology slides, we wanted to give a quick update on the status of the 6 contracted efforts that are currently in process. They're listed on this slide by due date. We're required to conduct those 2 recycling refund system studies. First is modeling what convenient access would look like, and the second is a community input process. We've hired a team led by Eastern Research Group to complete those 2 studies. The ERG team includes Resource Recycling Systems, Cascadia Consulting Group, HDR, and START Consulting Group. They're already working on the first phase of the contract, which is the recycling refund modeling study due to the legislature by January 1, 2026. Register on our Recycling Reform Act email, and you can participate in a review of that draft report. It's due early in January 2026, so we're probably only going to offer a 1-week review period for the draft report in October. Again, those dates haven't yet been set. The statewide list and 2 needs assessment have been combined into one single project. We're in contract negotiations with the selected bidder and expect to start that work in November. And contractor bids for the advisory council facilitator are due later this month. We anticipate having that contract in place by November.
That is a great transition to the duties of the advisory council. The advisory council must be established by Ecology by January of 2026, and we anticipate scheduling the first meeting soon after that. The meetings will serve, or members will serve staggered 4-year terms and will self-select a chair and vice chair and establish a code of conduct. The law mandates a minimum of 2 meetings per year, but it will be up to the council to set the cadence and agendas as needed with the support of the third-party facilitator. They will also be able to establish additional subcommittees as needed. The council will be responsible for consulting, reviewing, commenting, and making recommendations on most elements of the program implementation. You can visit the Advisory Council webpage or read through Section 050 to find more detail about the council, its membership, and its responsibilities. Speaking of membership, Ecology will appoint members according to these categories of interested parties. There are 15 dedicated seats. Ecology is then required to appoint 2 additional members. Those members can come from any of these categories or from an unlisted interested party to ensure that the council has diverse representation of perspectives and geography. There are then 2 additional non-voting members, those being Ecology and the Pro, for a total of 19 members. And those of you who subscribe to the Recycling Reform Act mailing list probably already saw the announcement yesterday, but the application for the Advisory Council is now available. The QR code on this slide will take you to our website where you can download the application form. Applications are due by October 6th. You can submit them to our shared inbox shown on the screen, recyclingreform@ecy.wa.gov. We anticipate a robust set of applicants, so please fill out the form completely and submit by the deadline. If you have any difficulties with the form, reach out to us and we'll send you a Word version. And then we tentatively expect to announce the members by December 1st. And then in addition to the main advisory council, the law also requires a 6-member equity subcommittee. We are consulting with a number of commissions identified in the law as we work to fill those positions.
Let's talk about producers of packaging and paper products. Producers are defined in the Recycling Reform Act in Section 020 in quite a bit of detail. That definition is segregated into several subcategories of producers of products sold at physical retail locations, products sold via e-commerce, and for paper products. The general defined categories of producer are listed on the left of this slide. Producer obligations are on the right. They must join a producer responsibility organization, or PRO, pay their fees, and report on what they sell into the state. The fees they pay will be set by the PRO and based on how much material they introduce into the state. Those fees must be structured in a way to incentivize improvements for waste reduction, reuse, and recycling, also known as eco-modulation. Producers are responsible under the Recycling Reform Act for the packaged items and paper products they introduce into Washington for consumer use. Refer back to slides 13 and 14 for the summary of the packaging and paper products that are exempted from the law, or review the exempt materials definition section in section 020. There are exemptions in the law for specific types of entities that are not required to fulfill the producer obligations under the Recycling Reform Act. Those exemptions include governments, specific types of organizations that are the second bullet, or producers that fall into the de minimis category. In addition, the law includes an option for a producer, group of producers, or the PRO to petition Ecology to consider alternative collection for a distinct covered material type. The law allows the alternative collection materials to be included in the PRO plan or to be separately submitted to Ecology under an alternative collection plan. Examples from other states that fit into the alternative collection could be packaging used for motor oil, where that packaging would be better collected through an alternative process due to the unique characteristics of the packaging. There are some nuances in the responsibilities for producers. On the left of this slide are the producer obligations. They must appoint the PRO, who will register with Ecology on their behalf and implement the approved program. Producers must be a member of a registered PRO and comply with the requirements of the law. The list on the right details the individual or alternative plan duties. The law does provide for the option of an individual producer to register as their own individual PRO for their own packaging or paper product. Those individual producer PROs must also submit fees to Ecology, prepare plans and annual reports. And as mentioned on the prior slide, an alternative collection program for a unique material can be established separate from the full program PRO plan. Okay, under the Recycling Reform Act, the Producer Responsibility Organization, or PRO, is a nonprofit that uses producer fees to pay for existing, improved, and expanded residential recycling service. The PRO is required to register with Ecology in March of 26, so we can't say for sure who the PRO will be, but Circular Action Alliance is the PRO of record in several other states. In Oregon, Circular Action Alliance, or CAA, has registered 2,843 producers, and in Colorado, they've registered 2,279 producers. The PRO obligations under the Recycling Reform Act are many and varied. They must cover all of Ecology's costs, set up a $5 million a year packaging reuse grant program starting in 2029. Among other things, the PRO must meet performance targets, conduct education and outreach, report annually to Ecology. And in Washington, the PRO will cover at least 90% of residents' curbside bin costs. Since we don't have the PRO registered in Washington yet, we aren't able to dive deep into PRO obligations. We expect to offer more information after we've registered the PRO in March of 26. What we do want to share today are the PRO responsibilities by due date. I'm not going to read through them all, but you can see they have steady responsibilities and obligations for the next 5 years and beyond. While a due date like the PRO plan, it's in October of 2028, the PRO will be conducting outreach and a collaboration with registered service providers and local governments in the years prior to that date. Additionally, the Advisory Council will be involved in activities providing input to the PRO on many of these actions. Two of the dates we want to highlight are March of 2026, when Ecology will receive the PRO registration. After that date, we expect to share more details on PRO duties, timelines, and activities. Additionally, the Recycling Reform Act requires the PRO to implement their approved plan by January of 2030. There's a lot to do between now and then. I can't repeat it enough. Sign up for our email list to stay in touch, stay informed, and participate in the process.
Up next are the service providers. Service providers are the entities that provide covered services for covered materials to covered entities. Refer back to the definitions section for a reminder of what each of those terms means. And remember that it's more than just curbside haulers and MRFs that will qualify as service providers. Government entities are also considered service providers, regardless of whether they provide the service themselves, contract for service, or otherwise arrange for service. Administrative costs, including education and outreach, are also eligible for reimbursement. And in addition to recycling, reuse and refill systems might also be eligible service providers. As far as service provider obligations, any service provider that intends to seek reimbursement needs to register with Ecology by January 31st of next year. So if you're not sure whether you qualify as a service provider, reach out to us soon so you'll know whether you need to register by January. The Pro will then work with the registered service providers on the program startup and implementation. Service providers will submit invoices to the Pro for eligible costs starting in 2030, and will have at least 50% of their costs reimbursed in 2030, at least 75% reimbursed in 2031, and at least 90% reimbursed in 2032 and after. Service providers will need to meet performance standards that are specified in the approved program plan and must ensure that materials are being sent to responsible end markets. They must provide documentation to the Pro regarding the materials they manage, and they must display their prices on customer bills minus the amount that was reimbursed by the Pro. For the service provider registration, the online registration form is currently under development and is expected to be available by December. As part of the registration process, all service providers will be asked to identify the type or types of service they provide, how many tons they manage, and the amount they billed for their services. And that information is to be broken down by service type and covered entity type. The information from this first round of registration will be helpful for informing the preliminary needs assessment. There will be a separate reporting element that only applies to MRFs. MRFs will be required to report inbound tons by jurisdiction and service provider. For outbound tonnage, they'll need to report on the destination company, location, and final use of each commodity. For contamination, they'll be required to report both inbound and outbound contamination rates, the composition of their residual rates, and the disposal location of those residuals. They'll also be asked to describe their methods of managing contaminants. And then last, they'll be identified to identify any violations of existing permits and to report on a number of labor metrics, including wages, unions, and workforce demographics. Other than the annual registration every January 31st, there aren't many statutory deadlines for service providers to meet. Starting in 2030, they'll submit invoices for payment, and in 2031, there will be a responsible end market certification requirement that applies only to MRFs. During this implementation phase, the service providers will have representation on the advisory council and will be asked to provide input on the studies and rulemaking. They will also need to work with the Pro in advance of 2030 to arrange for reimbursement and to prepare for any programmatic changes.
We'd like to wrap up with this summary of upcoming activities by the entities we covered today. We will share regular updates through our email list as each of these activities get moving along. Standing up the Recycling Reform Act will take teamwork from everyone involved. We have one last slide. One last time, please sign up for our email notices and reach out to us through our team email box. I'll put that in the chat in a minute. The Recycling Reform Act is going to require a lot of work from everyone. Thanks for joining us on this first step. On behalf of the Ecology team, I want to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, for your questions, and for even the ones we may not have the answers to at this time. We look forward to continued conversation and partnership with everyone involved.